work with Cameron Wilson?
Approximately 6 months.
So, having worked with him for so long, though your relationship was a professional one, how would you describe his personality?
Well, like you said, it was a professional one, and I can only comment that he was very polite to me, and he was cooperative in the circumstances. I found him to be a good client.
Judge Chantal Fortin claims that to her knowledge, Wilson came from a stable home, but his father, Abel Wilson, is currently in jail on the trial on charge of triple murder. He's also said to be the leader of the 28th gang. So, in light of all of this, how would you describe Cameron's upbringing in Hines Park?
Look, there was a probation officer's report which was done, right? So she goes into the home, she consults with the family, and her report was that he does come from a stable home in the sense that he had both his parents at home with him, and that he had a very good relationship with his siblings. He got along well with his siblings. His mother said that he was well behaved at home. He never gave any problems. So in that sense, based on the report, Judge Fortin says that he had a stable upbringing. But as I also raised in the mitigation, I said we can't also close our eyes to the fact that the father is, as you pointed out, currently charged with a triple murder. Apparently it was a drive-by shooting, and there was a pastor also that was slain in that shooting. And then we did have evidence in court by one witness who stated that the father was intimidating people. Right? In fact, he said shooting at people. And that was the evidence that was before the court, and there was also some allegations that he's involved in gangsterism. Now,
so Cameron, just to clarify for everybody listening, Cameron was aware from a young age of who his father was, or what the neighborhood was saying his father was involved in?
Look, my instructions was never that his father was involved in gangsterism.
Okay.
Right, that's my instructions. But what I asked the court to take into consideration are these objective facts, especially the fact he's now been arrested.
Yes.
And my argument was that she can't simply ignore those factors, and that it must have had an impact on him. Alright? So let's say if the father, because her view is he hasn't been found guilty of these charges, and therefore, and there was no formal evidence in her view that was placed before of the father's activities. Alright? But there was mention of the fact that the father is involved in gangsterism. And my view is that simply by that fact, Cameron must have been subjected to this type of behavior and the impact and the influence of that. Because his father's reputation in the community at large must have logically affected him. And that's the argument that I made, and I asked the court to take it into consideration.
So if it did affect him, to what extent do you think that this gangsterism that he saw from his father can be blamed for Wilson's alleged actions?
That question falls under the wider heading of the impact of gangsterism, right, and the subculture of violence in the community, right. I did make that argument in mitigation. Perhaps we'll deal with that later. But the actual aspect about the father, if we're just talking about the father, what I argued was, Cameron, as you know, he's been found to be a psychopath, right? So he's been diagnosed with that personality type. Now, one of the traits of a psychopath is that he needs to impress, right? Because they have various factors. They have like a checklist which the psychiatrist goes through. So the need to impress is one of that. And I also discussed it with the clinical psychologist in cross-examination, if that need to impress could have been directed specifically towards the father. And the psychologist accepted that, look, he said that about 52% of males have a need to impress their fathers. Right? So that was a possibility and is a possibility.
Regardless of his dad, and we touched on this earlier when we chatted, the need to impress. So during a few of these crimes, his friends were with him. Do you think that the need to impress with violence is a big deal on the flash between these young boys?
That was brought up in the trial. The psychiatrist mentioned that, and he said that the reason for these deeds, when he was accompanied, right? There was two occasions when he was accompanied.
Yes.
For a total of about 5 charges when he had someone with him. he said that might have been, exactly like you said, the need to impress and through violence, all right? But that was under the heading of him being a psychopath.
But doesn't that speak to a worse case about what's exactly happening in these communities?
Now that is a very important question that you ask. Is there a need to impress via or through violence? And yes, and I argued that. I said in the culture of gangsterism, right? And violence obviously is a marker. It's if I can use it, it's like a marker of manhood. And the more violent you are within that subculture, the more respect you get. You are seen as someone, someone of consequence.
Someone to be scared of, someone to fear.
Unfortunately, what has happened is they've replaced the need to be respected with the need to be feared. Mm-hmm. So it's like a shortcut to get some credit to your name, if I can use that expression. So yes, it does play a major factor generally within those who have been caught up in this culture now of not only gangsterism but just generally of violence and the skewed understanding of what it means to be a man. And that goes back to the community.
You mentioned earlier on that Cameron was deemed a psychopath by a forensic psychiatrist. This was based on things like Cameron's alleged failure to accept responsibility for what he's done, his lack of remorse and empathy throughout the trial. So in your professional opinion as an advocate, given Cameron's alleged state of mind, would you say that the way he was sentenced seems fair?
What I can tell you is that in mitigation, there's two aspects there, right? In mitigation, I did argue that because he is being held to be a psychopath, right? And that one of the criteria for a psychopath, and which they've ticked him off for, there's like a scoring list. There's a maximum of 40 points, and Cameron scored something like 30. And one of the points are that there's a lack of empathy. So my argument to the court was that because he lacks this, and also the psychiatrist couldn't rule out the fact that it could be genetic. You see, there's two components, a genetic component and of course the environmental. So if it is genetic, and they couldn't rule it out, and there's a high probability it is genetic, right? So if it is genetic and he simply lacks empathy because of his genetic condition, then we can't use the normal approach to moral guilt, because this has an impact on him being able to empathize with his victims.
Because it's biologically incapable.
Biologically, yes. There's not a full development, or it is not developed in the normal way, if I can use that expression.
Yes.
So I did argue that it's not a case of in the normal, when the court normally assesses moral guilt and the approach that they normally use, they should be mindful of this factor. So that was raised. I did use that as a mitigating factor. Now, you asked me about the sentence and whether I feel that it's fair. What I can comment on is that the state main thrust in the Cameron case was to have him declared a dangerous criminal in terms of section 286 capital A. Right? Now this is a very onerous section, because what it means is that they can incarcerate you for an indeterminate period. Right? Then after an allocated time, the person is brought back to court. Right? So now it's out of the hands of the prison authorities. They have to come back to the court. And then the court will decide if he is still, say, 10 years or 15 years, whether he's still considered to be a danger to society or not. And if the court is of the opinion then that he's still a danger, then his incarceration continues. So, in theory, if you are declared a dangerous criminal and the court considers you always to be a dangerous criminal and there's no improvement, that you're incarcerated basically for the rest of your life. Now, I know he was sentenced to 4 life sentences, and what was being widely reported in the press was 71 years. But I think that's misleading to the general public. The 4 life sentences, or rather the 71 years, is made up. They've calculated it. It's made up in the following sense, like for example, for one crime he might have been charged for 15 years and then 10 years. It was 5 years for one charge, or 6. So if you add up all those charges, aside from the 4 life sentences, they come to a total of 71. That's where the 71 comes from. But What is very important to understand is that it all runs together, what they call concurrently. So, in other words, effectively, Cameron Wilson must only sit for 25 years. It translates into a normal life sentence, because in 25 years, he's not automatically released. Like any person serving a life sentence,
is he reassessed?
in 25 years, you are eligible for parole.
Okay.
So that's what a life sentence means. It doesn't mean they just simply lock you up for the rest of your life. It means they must keep you in for 25 years before you get an opportunity for parole. So it's possible that in 25 years' time, his parole is successful and that he's released. You see? And secondly also, the court did not accept that Cameron Wilson's case is 1/4 section 286 capital A. And that, my view, is the main reason why they got the report from the psychiatrist, because at the end of the day, the psychiatrist pointed out one of the factors. There's 2 factors that are required, and there was like 5 of them that signed, and they only included the first factor. So the second factor was absent, and I argued that that is one of the reasons why it should not be classified in terms of that section.
What exactly was the second factor?
The second factor is that he must be considered to be a threat to the community.
Isn't he?
Well, you see, the legislation is very clear. You've got to have both factors.
Okay.
That he must be a danger mentally and physically to other people's mental and physical well-being.
Yes.
And the second factor is that he must then also be considered to be a danger to the community. Alright? It's 2 separate factors in terms of the legislation. Now, their report only contained the first one. It must also have contained the second one, which it didn't. That was my argument.
Yeah.
And I said the fact that it's absent means that the requirements for the strict requirements section 286 capital A is not there. Remember, this is a very serious section which they wanted him incarcerated in terms of. And the requirements are strict. And my view, and I argued it, and is that it wasn't met. So it wasn't simply only that factor. There's also other factors, naturally, which the court took into consideration. But my point is the main thrust of the state was to have him incarcerated in terms of that section.
Regarding what the psychologist said about him, I read in one of the articles that one of the psychologists said that he is not able to be rehabilitated.
What they said is that in the 80s they had 2 hospitals dedicated to the treatment of psychopathy, but it's been closed down. And he said internationally also they followed that now, because they accept that there is no actual cure or treatment geared towards curing people with psychopathy. But he says it's a personality type. Not all people who are classified as psychopaths are bent to violence.
I have heard that CEOs and very high-flying businessmen are actually psychopaths.
That's what the psychiatrist said. He said, look, even presidents can be psychopaths. So it's not necessarily means that that you'll resort to violence. And what my argument was to court was that, notwithstanding the poor prognosis for rehabilitation, the clinical psychologist did recommend that he must have sessions with a clinical psychologist who's trained in the treatment of psychopathy.
Will this be throughout his sentence?
Yes. So the fact that that has been mentioned, I argue, creates a window for rehabilitation. And so I can't give a final answer because it's obviously beyond my scope of expertise. But based on what the evidence was before court, there is a rehabilitative step that will be taken. And I argue that must be seen as a prospect for possible rehabilitation in future. The testimony by the psychiatrist also that people who are psychopaths and who commit violence internationally now, the consensus is that when they reach about 50, although he said that's not a magic number, but around that age they stop with the violent behavior.
But is that because physically it becomes a little more difficult? The
judge asked him that question, the judge asked him to elaborate on that, and that was basically his answer.
Okay. But
in fact, the impression that I got is that they can't really say for certain, but the fact that he's just physically older does seem to play a major role.
Okay,
whether it actually has a mental component as well, they didn't go into that.
Okay. On that, I find it very interesting that now suddenly, and this is just my personal opinion, now that Cameron has been sentenced and people like him, after the sentencing and put in jail, the damage is done. Now suddenly there's rehabilitation. Now the state comes in and everybody gets therapy or whatever happens. But coming back to our previous point, if at a grassroots level, people had come in instead of rehabilitation, taught those lessons from the beginning and taken time to educate the colored boys in the flat, or whoever, these little kids, and there was activities for them, and they were educated about their feelings and anger and gangsterism and their opportunities. And I know it sounds cliche, but it's a real thing. Do you think all of this could be avoided?
No, it's not cliche. Firstly, I don't think it's cliche. I think that's a very important topic that gets very little time.
I think people always roll their eyes when I say we need interventions in the Cape Flats.
Yes, and the greater, you see, Cameron Wilson is an extreme example of what is happening on the Cape Flats on a daily basis.
Yeah, not everybody's going to become a psychopath, but
yes, the culture of violence is there. Anybody who says, well, there isn't a culture or a subculture, I'll put it that way, a subculture of violence on the Cape Flats, it's just naive, and they're living in some fairyland. The reality is that gangsterism and the culture of violence, subculture of violence, is part of the reality of the Cape Flats. Right? Now, speaking about other opportunities, what I did argue, and I went on extensively about it in mitigation, is that, we get back to Cameron now, he belonged to a soccer club called Mowgli Soccer Club. It was a community initiative, it was for free, and he went at least twice a week, formally they had matches and so on, and that excluded his training, right? So the bottom line is that for a long time, Cameron was heavily involved with his soccer training. And unfortunately, for some reason, because a probation officer's report is supposed to be objective, she just never went to go and interview the people at the soccer club. So I said we lost valuable information to see how he interacts with his peers at the club.
Or if they had a problem with
him. And how he interacts with his seniors, because we know they gave him a bad report at school, and we'll get back to that later. But here was a valuable opportunity to get a fuller picture of Cameron, which the probation officer ought to have done and she didn't do. And I cross-examined her on that. But the point that I'm trying to make is Cameron did reach out to what was given to him. That was the only thing, the soccer club, right? They've got a soccer field there in Heinz Park, and clearly it played a central feature in his life, because after he'd given up school, his mom said he was just playing Xbox at home, and then it was the soccer. So, the lack of alternatives for young men, all right, is a major factor, because now, in that Snyman matter, which I did where a student was murdered on the school premises, and I brought the same issue up, and I got some negative feedback. People tried to create the impression that I was trying to blame apartheid now for the murder. The point is that the legacy of apartheid is such that people in the Cape Flats, right, there is a lack of resources for them. So now the factors are stacked so heavily towards moving into gangsterism, more so than in other communities with this greater privilege. That's the argument. Now a lot of people says, well, I come from the ghetto, for example, I never fell prey to that, but that's a naive argument, right? The point is that in these areas, the attraction from gangsterism is greater, and it has a stronger drawing effect or pulling effect on youngsters, and that's a fact, and that is something that we need to look at. And like you pointed out now, the lack of alternatives plays a very big role. And secondly, with the lack of alternatives is also the lack of educational programs.
We've spoken about a lot of shortcomings now in the trial as a whole, but in your defense you also pointed out shortcomings of the investigation itself. Can you just walk us through some of those shortcomings?
Just very briefly, one of the factors which I found highlights the way the investigation was approached is the Lakita Moore matter. When I asked in cross-examination the sister, who did Lakita leave with when she left the karaoke war, right? She listed several names of young men. that Lakita had left with. And when I questioned the investigating officer on this, he said he never knew anything about it. The very first time that he heard about the fact that Lakita had left with a group of boys was in court. Now, I found that very difficult to accept because it wasn't through extensive cross-examination where Mercia told me who her sister had left with. I just asked her and she, so how as the investigating officer did he not know that? So that raises a very serious question, or it gives you an insight as, in my view, how the investigation was conducted. That, for me, is a serious omission by the state, that they never knew this important aspect, and this important aspect was never brought up from the outset, and it ought to have formed part of the investigation. So that is one aspect which I feel just gives you an overview. Then if you look at the Ernest Erasmus matter, right, we had two witnesses who stated that they saw Cameron Wilson stab Ernest in his neck. Now, from the medical evidence, it was clear it was in the jugular vein, right? Then their evidence, the girlfriend of Ernest Erasmus, on her own version, she then goes to sit in the shebeen for about half an hour. She just saw she just saw a boyfriend being stabbed now in the neck, right, by Cameron. Then she goes sit in the shebeen for half an hour with a friend. Then someone comes in after half an hour and says, well, Ernest is lying on the field, and then she says, well, she doesn't take him seriously. And then 15 minutes later, so it's 45 minutes later, someone comes again and says, well, then she decides after 45 minutes where she must go look for a boyfriend. So that alone, I argued, is highly improbable. Then secondly, as the doctor said, it's a fact. He stabbed in his jugular vein. Now, the shebeen, or the drug house, if you want, is on one side, right, and across, diagonally across a soccer field is where Ernest Erasmus' body was found. So how did he get from that point where he was stabbed on their version to right across a soccer field after being stabbed in his jugular vein? And then add to that there's no blood trail. There's no blood. The police.
And if you stab in the jugular, that means that
it should
quite a lot.
Because there's no blood trail, right? The police never saw blood trail, even around where the body was found. There's no blood trail. The state never pointed out to the court that the mark on the photograph that is next to the body is blood. I had to cross-examine the police officer, and he had to concede that was blood. So it looked like the body fell on its stomach, right? Yes. And then he bled, because you will see that if you look at the photograph, you'll see that the stain is basically the same shape as if the body had been lying there. And then when he was turned over, it's clear he was turned over. The sand on his sweater and so on, and the blood stain is basically the same silhouette like his body. So it appears just from the objective evidence that he was stabbed there where the body was found. Because if you look at it from a logical point of view, and you take into normal concepts like gravity, the man would have bled and he would have left a blood trail.
Yes.
And you add to that the strange version of his own girlfriend that she went to go and sit in a shebeen, not thinking that it was that serious. There's no way. If you saw the person being stabbed
in the neck.
Also, the doctor said it couldn't have been a screwdriver. His view it was a knife. The one doctor said that if it was a screwdriver, there had to be a screwdriver that was sharpened. So there was also that. But I'm just talking about the objective evidence. So those are errors, or not errors, but shortcomings that I argued in the Ernest Erasmus case, and I found that to be problematic in the investigation. Because, and while we're on the Ernest Erasmus matter, the officer who arrived on the scene said he never was told that, look, Ernest wasn't stabbed here, Ernest was stabbed across the field by the shebeen. He said the first time I heard about that was in court. So my view is that if he was indeed stabbed at the shebeen, they would have told the officer, but he wasn't stabbed here, he was stabbed there, go take photographs, or at least they would have told him.
People would have seen.
They would have said, it didn't happen here, it happened, So that's the Ernest Erasmus matter, which I found was problematic. Also the Tohir Stover matter, we know that there was other people involved in that matter. The evidence is that someone else had come in shortly before the shooting to buy some chocolates, and that someone else initially was also arrested for that matter. There was a statement also from this person, and that was never ventilated in court. And also the court properly didn't couldn't accept the eyewitness testimony of Mr. Stober's son, because on his own version he said, look, my concentration was on my father. And Cameron's reason for being there afterwards is that the whole neighborhood ran out after the shooting. And it's about a minute's walk away from his home. So he said after he had the shooting, like everybody else, the whole crowd, he also went out. So I'm just giving you now examples now of three aspects of the investigation which was problematic. And yes, I found those aspects troublesome. There was also a confession which was taken from him, but the prosecutor correctly didn't even attempt to have that placed before the court, because you would see the problems with that. And so that wasn't also placed before the court. And then there was a statement which they said they could have only received the information from Cameron, and I argued extensively that couldn't have been, that wasn't the case, because the investigating officer had actually spoken to victims before he had taken that statement. So the information of that event he could have got from them.
So it didn't come directly from Cameron himself?
Cameron says, well, Cameron denied it. And my argument was, so that's another aspect of the investigation which I argued was problematic.
So now, in the media, words like serial killer and psychopath has been thrown around quite a lot. So how has Cameron been dealing with the negative light in which has been painted by the media?
Look, he did mention to me once, and I mentioned this in court, and that is why I feel I can discuss it with you. In the media, he was also referred to as a monster. Now, what the media likes to do is they like to use it in inverted commas, and that, of course, absolves them of everything, which is a problem. Let's just say it's a problem. Now, I argued that it's against his human dignity, and to be referred to in these especially to be referred to in that manner. And what I argued before Judge Fortuin was that we've accepted, right, in South Africa, in terms of our constitution, that a human being has value simply because he's a human being. Right? So that's the starting point in our whole constitution. All our law is built on that. That no matter what you do, because you're a human being, you are entitled to certain rights. And I think this is also an aspect which I just want to elaborate on. People do ask questions like, how can you defend someone charged with such serious crimes? The point is, every single person, all the listeners, have a set of rights. Right? We've actually fought very hard for those rights in South Africa. That one of those rights is the right to a fair trial. Right? In the olden days, the police could come, kick your door open, and incarcerate you without a trial. Right? No evidence led, no trial. We fought against things like that, so that we have a fair trial. So, as all the listeners, they've got a right to a fair trial. Now, most people won't need to exercise that trial or exercise that right.
Yeah.
But they have it. I like to say it's like an insurance policy. You might need it one day, you might never need it. But if you do need it on the day, it is there for you. Now, those rights are being tested on a daily basis in court. The state seeks to erode those rights. And that is what the defense lawyers do, in the trenches. They protect those rights. So when the state tries to take away the right to freedom, then the defense lawyer is there to protect those rights. And that is what we're doing. So the first thing that you're defending really is the set of rights. Now, it just seems that like in Cameron's case, he's a representative of those rights. And that is first and foremost what we are defending.
But as a person, does it take an emotional toll on you to defend somebody who's done monstrous, and I'm putting that in inverted commas because
look, I've been doing it for 19 years. I've defended people accused of raping children, killing children, and it's not, the profession is not for everybody. Like I suppose being a doctor is not for everybody. If you can't deal with blood, then don't become a doctor. The same I suppose will apply to being a lawyer. It's something that's part and parcel of the job, and one must have a holistic view of what you are doing. You're not simply, I think a lot of people, and rightfully they overemphasize the personal relationship, I put that in inverted commas now, between the lawyer and his client. But like I pointed out, we're not just there defending our client. We are we are assisting the court to arrive at the truth, number one. And number two, we're also protecting the rights which everyone has.
Okay, so you say, on that, you said the media called him a monster.
Yes.
Do you think the media coverage, because...
they quoted someone who called him a monster, yes.
Yeah, so, but do you think that the media coverage, because I know, I followed the case, I didn't necessarily report on it, but I followed it, and I saw that even though, as the media, we are supposed to be neutral, people did take a stance, you know, they did, the media coverage was negative. Do you think that impacted the outcome?
Look, a judge is trained not to be affected by matters like that. What the judge will take into consideration is the community sentiments, right?
Yes.
In any matter, as one of the factors. But it's only a factor that the judge takes into consideration, or even a magistrate, whatever case it is. And it's not a matter which a trained professional like a judge will overemphasize or underemphasize. So it did play a role, because these factors do play a role, but I don't feel that it... well, there are rules as to how a judicial officer must approach that element.
Right. Cameron, we spoke about the fact that he's been deemed a psychopath and he doesn't have remorseful feelings, or is incapable of empathy. That's basically what psychopath means, right? But now after his sentence, I saw that he clapped his hands. After that though, has he shown any type of remorse or sadness, perhaps not for the other people, but sadness that he's now incarcerated, or any other types of feelings? Because I think that when the sentence was given, or the judgment was given, he clapped, and that was like the biggest story.
Yes, I didn't see that, but I was informed that he clapped
his hands. Did he show any other type of emotion after that? You've obviously debriefed with him after all of that happened.
Look, I don't know how much credit or credence you want to put on to that aspect. My interaction with him afterwards was as usual.
Professional.
We discussed the sentence, we discussed the pros and the cons, so to say, and he needed time to think whether I should lodge an appeal or not. I still have to take instructions from him, but that was about it.
I only asked because I think that was the one act that made people, like the general public, think, wow, he's not showing remorse. You know, like that made them relate with what all the psychologists were saying.
Look, that was my first point that I argued in mitigation. There's no remorse. Right? The mere fact that he maintains his innocence clearly shows that he doesn't accept responsibility for the charges that he has been found guilty of. He was acquitted on 2 charges, rape matter and attempted murder. But the other charges, he still maintains his innocence, so there's an absence of remorse. And I argued that to some extent before the judge. There was this case law which says that it's not an aggravating factor, and there's conflicting case law on that point. And I also brought up the personality type and the lack of empathy, and I asked her to view that lack of remorse within that light. So once again, it's a factor. You must see, when it comes to sentencing, right? There's many factors which the court has to take into consideration. There is a view also that sentencing procedures is the most difficult part of an entire trial, because there are so many different factors. Like his youth was a major factor.
Yes.
He's also he's got no previous convictions. You know, the outcry by the community. All these factors you place before a judge, and then she is faced with a very difficult task of sifting through all of those factors and then coming up with what she deems to be a just sentence. And that is the one aspect that I am happy about is that she acknowledged that this isn't a case that warrants the Section 286 capital A, the dangerous criminal. So I was satisfied on that aspect specifically. Yes.
Because essentially, what a lot of people are saying, and this is not necessarily the angle that the media took, was that Cameron is also a victim. If we just lock him away indefinitely, it doesn't seem fair. That's not necessarily my opinion. That's things that I've heard in discussions. Do you think that's accurate?
This case is something, well, it goes a little bit beyond the law, but it does raise important questions, because look, the psychiatrist explained during the trial that psychopathy used to be considered a mental illness and is no longer considered an illness. So at one stage, for a long time, he would have been considered to be mentally ill. And then secondly, they say that there's a very strong genetic component, or it could be all genetic. He couldn't rule that out. And if it's genetic, then how much blame can you attach to someone who's born in a particular way with a particular personality type?
On that, I find, back to I'll take it to the grassroots, go and teach the kids in the flats. So if it's genetic, should, in your opinion, this is an opinion question, should his brothers and sisters be monitored? Should his family members be monitored? Should they be intervened? Now, because we know Cameron is out there, right? And we know what he did, and he's now in jail. But there's a chance it's genetic. Should we not be preventing this from happening again?
Look, I can't comment on that.
Okay.
That's beyond my scope. I can't.
Okay. Should I ask probably to a psychologist or psychiatrist about that question?
Yes.
Cool.
The way that resources are allocated, specifically state resources that are allocated to all of us basically, but especially those in the Cape Flats, do you think that is fair?
Look, I've argued before that it's not fair, and I'll tell you why. Well, I did a matter, S versus Momadi and 3 others. They were accused and later convicted of going on a spate of burglaries, right? And there was also an incident of rape, which my client was found guilty of. But this spate of burglaries occurred in the Camps Bay area, and so in the trial, the evidence was that they had the Camps Bay community. Now they were assigned a unit that operated 24/7, right, around the clock for 6 months. Extra officers, a whole unit of officers was appointed to them, and it was headed by that officer who was leading that unit. Was the head of the prevention of organized crime unit, a very experienced officer, he had more than 30 years experience, and they worked for 6 months before the arrest of Mr. Momadi and the others, right, which put an end now to the spate of burglaries in the Camps Bay area. But in that same time, when we were doing the trial, the same thing happened in the Athlone Lansdowne area. In fact, I myself woke up with 5 guys in my bedroom. With a screwdriver, and when I looked at them, I felt as if I was transported into one of my witness statements, because it was basically the same thing, right? And then we had like more than 20 incidents between Athlone and Lansdowne, and then the police only appointed a single investigating officer to attend to all of that while it was still happening. So there was no emphasis on preventing the crime. What we then did was, a colleague and myself, we organized a petition, and we went to the police and we demanded that more officers must be put into the investigation. They did. They had some limited success, but then it petered out. But what struck me was the way that resources were allocated completely differently. The way the people of Camps Bay were treated versus the way the people of the Athlone Lansdowne area was treated. And that is before the report came out by Kato Reagan, a damning report of how resources are being allocated. So this is a very, very important aspect to consider, especially for us on the Cape Flats, because it's costing lives. Now, we heard in Cameron Wilson that an investigating officer has like 250 dockets. And there was a question as to why nobody had come to Cameron Wilson's house looking for him, why it took them like 2 years before he was arrested for some of the charges. And they boiled it down to resources. Now, why is it that if you have a hotspot, an area where there's a high crime rate, do you have so few officers? And why is it that in the Camps Bay area, they went beyond they even had a caravan, just to highlight to you the extent, to house the unit, because the police station apparently wasn't big enough.
Wow.
Now, the press did report on it. There was press coverage, but it kind of just disappeared, That's a glaring, and that's just one example. Now, the question I have is, how often is it happening currently? And if we can see, how do they allocate their resources? Your number of police officers, your vehicles, which areas are getting what, and is it proportional? So the question about resources and the available resources, right? So first of all, they need more resources, that's what the police always say. Right? So aside from that they need more resources, the question is, how are you allocating the existing resources? And why is it that the Cape Flats, that is got such a high crime rates, are getting such poor treatment? Why? Why is it that you can actually allow one investigating officer and saddle him with 225 on average dockets, and then you expect him actually to do a good job? Is that possible also, in all fairness to the police officers? That's the first question. And then the second question is the management of existing resources. And in the Cameron case, for example, the state asked for several days to look for certain documents which they needed to hand in to assist them in their case. Now they said, we do have the documents, it's now in containers, the police put it in containers. They didn't bother with boxes or envelopes or numbering system, they just sort of plonked it all in the containers. They searched frantically for it for several days and they couldn't find it. In the end, that information wasn't handed in. Now that doesn't go to allocation of resources, that goes to management. And the officer who came in to testify, he said, well, he's only been there now for 6 months. 6 months is a very long time, it's half a year. Why didn't he sort it out?
Yes.
And I think the public has a right to be angry. You see, you've got to break it down. The police are right, they don't have sufficient resources. Secondly, they are overworked. Right? And why is there so few, for example, investigating officers? But then also, their share of the thing is, why do they mismanage the resources that they do have? And why are they so disorganized? So those are 3 aspects that have to be looked at. You know?
Do you have a comment,
I think that concludes everything.
Is there anything you want to say in conclusion?
No, thank you for coming. I'm happy that you guys
Thank
gave
you
me the
for having
opportunity.
us.
No.